in the room. We are ecstatic to be here on this evening. So looking forward to having a magnetic night. Not just magnetic, but memorable in such a way that I have a feeling that on tonight, by the time the dialogue is concluded, some hearts will be regulated, some minds will be fixed and changes. My name is Dion Jackson, and I will be hosting and moderating the conversation on tonight. Of course, an extremely delicate conversation, but I am absolutely honored that District Attorney Lori Frugoli would even have the conscious mind to make sure that whatever she could do to support the community, to support her position, both spiritually, mentally, emotionally, but more importantly, from the perspective of law, that she would be willing to share this evening with each and every one of you to make sure that you are comforted to the highest level. And so as we begin tonight, I'm simply here to set a few very small ground rules, introduce you to the amazing panel that has been gathered here specifically for the Marin County. And I'm believing that, again, by the time the dialogue, the conversation, the engagement is concluded, that you'll feel empowered. And just for those of you, I know you've seen flyers online, the discussion title, while touchy, I believe is absolutely necessary. Responding to hate crimes, racism, and anti-Semitism in Marin County, a community conversation. That means that your voices, your ideas, your thoughts are absolutely welcome. As we are here this evening, certainly as the numbers continue to rise, we're well above 250 people, which is why I know that this discussion is important to each of you. We want you to know that we welcome your questions. We're actually excited to hear your hearts and your minds concerning these very, very sensitive issues. The Q&A chat box is open and available. You're more than welcome to jot down your thoughts if you have some questions that are posing or looming as we are going through the process of the discussion. You'll be able to leave those questions there, and at a later date, there's a community that's going to be built and centered around making sure each and every one of these questions are answered with care, with quality, and that they're answered authentically. In an effort, again, to build stronger community there in the county of Marin. There are a few ground rules, and again, I'm here to make sure that the dialogue is clear and concise, that we follow timelines in an effort to respect one another, that we share our thoughts and opinions, as sensitive in nature as they may be, not only respectfully, but in such a way that there's a great takeaway for everyone involved here. I think that it is important that you share passionately and that you share intently, but we also want to make sure that no one leaves this meeting tonight traumatized as a result of a conversation of such a sensitive nature. So I am looking forward to the later times of discussion. We will have an open Q&A. Within the walls of the open Q&A, it will be first come, first serve, a specific number selected, as we only have 2 hours allotted for this conversation tonight. We don't want to rob you of all of your time, but we know if we don't start somewhere, these kinds of conversations will never start. And so that being said, there are multiple members of the community, of your community at large there in the city of Marin, that will be contributing. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce a very brief introduction of tonight's panelists. And then right after that, we're going to go into hearing from the DA, Lori Frugoli, in regards to our subject at hand on tonight. And so the panel introductions go as follows. And if you are a note taker or a writer, feel free to write these names down. They're all local community members. Really quick reminder, if you are Spanish speaking, there is an interpretation button at the very bottom of your screen. And you will be able to hit that button, as well as, of course, we have an ALS interpreter for those that are hearing impaired that is translating for your convenience. And we want to make sure that all are accommodated in that right. So our panelist introduction goes as follows. Number one is Rabbi Susan Leiter, the senior rabbi of the congregation Kol Shafar. We also have a guest speaker this evening. Her name is Tavia Barnes Sankin. She's the executive director and volunteer attorney at Lawyers for One America, providing pro bono legal services. Ms. Barnes is also a director on the board of Congregation Kol Shafar. We also have Mr. Seth Brisk, and the regional director of the Anti-Defamation League. Fourth, we'll have Alexandria Rosen, Fairfax resident, speaking on behalf of the Fairfax Racial Equality and Social Justice. Morgan Blum-Schneider, Director of Jewish Family and Children's Service Holocaust Center. Ms. Patrice O'Neill, founder of Not in My Town, and a local native, full of wisdom, I understand, Mr. Noah Griffin, a local resident, historian, and one of the leaders in changing the name of the Dixie School District. There is a brief interjection, and I'm going to introduce him anyway. We also have a Federal Bureau of Investigations officer with us, Mr. Craig D. Fair, actually special agent, in charge of Federal Bureau of Investigations, the San Francisco Division. Thereafter, we will be having an open dialogue in just a moment, but right before we go into those Q&A sessions with members of your community, I want to introduce to some and to present to others your district attorney, Lori Frugoli. Lori, I hand it to you. Make sure you unmute yourself, beautiful.
That was the end. I'm done. No, kidding. So thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to attend this important conversation tonight. I want people to understand that we look at this as an opportunity to shine a light on racism and anti-Semitism and the hateful behavior and crimes that we know are occurring in our community. So I'm honored to serve as your district attorney and answer your questions tonight. These are important topics. And I really want people to understand that my office and I have been listening to you as a community and your reaction to some of our decisions. And I want to make it really clear to everyone here that I honor the panelists who are here tonight for accepting my intentional invitation to them to come to this forum. And I want to make it really clear to those who may have been critical of that decision on anybody's part. These panelists are not here to support or bolster any of my decisions or any of my office's decisions in this county. And they are here because they join me in coming here with an open heart and an open mind to explain the realities of hate crimes and these kind of behaviors in our community and come together and find a resolution. And sometimes that resolution and action comes not from the criminal justice system. And so I honor our panelists who are here today, and they each have their own beliefs and views and represent different agencies and entities and groups within the community, including Fairfax. And they are here to have a voice at the table, as they should. So I want to make that really clear. We hope to have a meaningful conversation tonight, and we do hope at the end that you will join us in moving together to stop hate in our community. It's really important that we all accept the fact that we're not pretending there's no hateful behavior, there's no anti-Semitic behavior in our county, and that there's no racist, there's no white supremacist. All of these things are happening in our community, and nobody is trying to hide that or whitewash that. Our panelists and people in my office live and breathe and hear about these hate crimes day in and day out. And we are well aware of the historical cultural pain that is caused by this. So we do hope that you are here with an open heart and open mind to help us move forward. And I'm going to answer some questions that have been posed. And I do want to start with an apology, frankly. I've been listening to the community. I've been listening to people who send me emails and contact me, and listening to the leaders, not only in our community from political or religious, and the leaders who are here at this seminar today, at our forum. And one thing is really clear, that in this culture, especially behind the events that happened January 6th, when that happened at our Capitol, that were frightening and horrific to everyone who saw them, that on the heels of that, for my office and me to use the term insufficiency of evidence in referring to a criminal case without further explanation of details really struck many as dismissive and not taking hate crimes and this kind of behavior seriously. And I can see how some would think that, based upon the reactions I've heard and based upon hearing how that affected people without knowing the whole story that I know, some of which I can share about these crimes, and some of them we're not able to share because of our ethical obligations. But I do want people to know that I apologize for using that term and not explaining it in greater detail, when most people looked at it like, DA Fergoli, how can you say there's no crime? There's insufficient evidence. We're looking at it. It's under our nose. So I just want to acknowledge and apologize to people who took it as a sign that my office doesn't take these cases seriously, because that's not the case in any way, shape, or form. So I hope that people will open their hearts and accept that apology and really listen to, I'm going to answer your questions tonight. So one thing to be clear, I just want people to understand on a different level. As prosecutors, when we determine whether or not we're going to file a case, we always put great care and consideration into it. In a hate crime like this, it's not a decision that's made by one person. It's a decision that's made usually by several people. In fact, moving forward, we're going to have a specially assigned team to look at these cases and other cases. But we know the magnitude of filing criminal charges or not in a case, and the effects that that has upon the victim of a crime, the witness of a crime, and someone who's charged with a crime. So we have an ethical obligation to investigate these cases thoroughly, and we do. So I mentioned what happened at the Capitol, and I want to go back to events that have been brought to my attention in the community where people have not understood why we can't file criminal charges, or why we did not file criminal charges. And I just want to be clear, as a lifelong resident of this county, it makes me sick when I hear people in our community tell me about a caravan of people driving into a community of primarily people of color on a weekend when they're in a shopping center with their children, and taunting them reportedly with racist comments. And I want to say that I'm proud of our community in Marin throughout the past year and longer for really handling these situations. I know people were angry, but handling them in a peaceful manner. Of all the places in the country, we have really remained, I believe, the most peaceful. And I think that is a very important factor to remember. We have a very safe community here, and I'm proud of the way people handle these situations, despite the fact that I know it causes angst and pain. It pains me when I hear that children at a school are painting swastikas, and then there's swastikas being hung in a local post office. make no mistake, we don't condone this behavior. It shouldn't be tolerated. It's so bad for our community on every level, every level. And the sad fact is, and the reality is, that there are times when we are not able to seek justice in the criminal system. And we're going to have a discussion about that tonight. So one thing I do want to talk about is people have asked me about a couple of cases. And sometimes we can't tell you everything that we know in a criminal case, frankly. So for starters, I want to make very clear some misinformation that apparently is pretty prevalent in the community, and that has to do with the incident that occurred at St. Raphael's Church when a statue of Junipero Serra was vandalized. I have been told by multiple people that hate crimes were filed in that case. And that is simply not the case. The people were issued citations for that. And there was a request by my office to file those charges. However, when we carefully reviewed the case and all the evidence in that case, we determined it was not a hate crime, but it was a crime of vandalism. So that's a situation where misinformation really spreads quickly, and it's unfortunate because we look at all these cases independently and, again, very carefully, because we understand the magnitude of filing criminal charges against someone. There's two other cases that occurred in the county that I have been asked about. One has to do with an incident at Redwood High School, and I appeared on a forum with the County Office of Education talking about that case. And because that case involves juveniles, the sad fact is, for people who must and want to know what happened in that case, because juveniles are protected and their conduct is protected for good reason, that information as to what, if anything, happened in that case is not going to be disclosed to the public because juveniles have that protection by law. The same thing is the case in the situation with the Yima store in Tiburon, where on election day, there was an Instagram posting that with two little gun emojis that somebody was going to raid that store if Biden won. And that too is a case where the actions that were taken by the juvenile justice system and the police department will remain confidential because the juveniles are protected. And some people don't understand that and believe that, but the fact of the matter is laws are becoming much more protective of children and their behavior because a lot of it relates back to the school to prison pipeline, which we hear so much about. So in the scales of justice, that's the decision that is made. But those are two incidents clearly of social media activities by youth. And that's something that the Anti-Defamation League tracks very carefully. And when Seth speaks, I imagine he will be discussing that. So the last case I was going to talk about that I have a feeling it is the reason why most people are here today is the situation where the young man was videotaped putting up swastikas in Fairfax. And I want to say, first of all, that my office did carefully review this case. Many people have asked if we consulted with other entities such as the FBI. Yes, we did. We consulted with the U.S. Attorney's Office. We consulted with the California State Department of Justice. And we did a thorough records check, as we do in all cases. And I do want people to know there is no indication that Fairfax was targeted specifically by this individual. There's just no evidence of that. And I understand that doesn't make anybody feel any safer or make that behavior any more acceptable, because it's not. But I do want people to understand that we did consult with other entities and who came to the same conclusion as we did at this point. And I do want to make clear as well, these cases most of the time have a 1-year or 3-year statute of limitations. If any new evidence should come before us, we are always, as we do in all cases, going to look at it carefully and reevaluate the case from bottom to top and determine if what any new information we have changes where we're at. So in that case, the primary question people had was why isn't it a hate crime? And so to help me with that, I wanted to use actually some information we have from the California State Attorney General's office. And I'm going to ask Jason if he can load that up for me, those 3 slides. Thank you. So this slide kind of tells the whole story of the frustration of not only law enforcement, but prosecutors across the nation, because most of the hate crime statutes in the United States and clearly in California are sometimes difficult to prove. And it's hard for people to understand the difference between a hate crime and a hate incident. And I think our California Attorney General has done a great job of describing it. So we have this from his website. And basically what it says is a hate incident is an action or behavior motivated by hate, but legally protected by the First Amendment to freedom of expression. Examples of hate incidents are name calling, insults, distributing hate material in public places, displaying hate material on your own property. And the US Constitution, which we know is the cornerstone of our democracy, does allow hate speech as long as it doesn't interfere with civil rights of others. And if an incident starts to threaten a person or property, it may become a hate crime. And hate crimes are defined in a different section, but the hate crime is a crime against a person, a group, or a property motivated by the victim's real or perceived protected social group. And that can be, the group could be consisted of your race, your religion, your sexual preferences, a physical disability. There's a laundry list of descriptors that fall into hate crimes. So that's what a hate incident is, which is much of what we see in our communities. And there's a reason why, because people who are committing these incidents know what they're doing. They know what the law is. And that is an unfortunate reality of basically where we're at, and the pluses and minuses of the Constitution. So may I ask you, Jason, to go to the next slide? And so the difference with a hate crime is that we, number one, have to have, unless it fits into a different penal code section, we have to have an underlying crime to start with. If you have an underlying crime, it could be vandalism, it could be rape, sexual assault. We've prosecuted someone for arson. Almost any crime, if you have an underlying crime, if it was committed because the criminal chose the victim or property because they belong to one of those protected groups, as I mentioned, such as a certain religion or gender, if the person made written or verbal threats showing a prejudice, so these are factors you can use to determine if it was a hate crime. If the crime happened on a date that's important for the victim's protected group, or if there is organized hate activity in the area. These are factors that you can use to determine, was it motivated by hate? Was it primarily driven by hate? So when we go to court, we have to first prove the underlying facts of a crime, be it the vandalism or some kind of physical assault. Then you have to prove, was it motivated by a bias against one of these groups? So it's a two-step process to obtain a conviction in those cases when you have a separate underlying crime and a hate crime enhancement. And I have one more slide there. And so I just want to be clear that people understand the US Constitution allows hate speech as long as it does not interfere with the civil rights of others. If a hate incident starts to threaten a person or property, it may become a hate crime. So this is the difficulty. This is where the rubber meets the road as prosecutors. We have to make these difficult decisions all the time. And so when we look at cases, and I'm going to go back to the Fairfax case for a moment, when we look at cases and we have perhaps a separate penal code section, which many people have asked me about, there's a separate penal code section that actually talks about swastikas. And it indicates that if you were to place a swastika on somebody's private property, not public property, private property, without that person's authorization, with the intent to terrorize them, that could be a crime. And the factors that you look at, number one, you have to have done that with the intent of terrorizing not the community, but the property owner or the person that lives there. And so to that particular penal code, which people have specifically asked me about, quite a few of my questions, we had 40 questions come in online, by the way. Quite a few questions were asked about that. And the crux of the matter is we need a victim who would testify it was their property, who would testify the person didn't have permission to put that swastika or any other offensive material on their property, and that it was done so without their permission. And we need those elements before we can go to court and prove a case. Some crimes you can prove without that type of a victim or witness, but that particular penal code calls for that. And so when we look at whether or not we can fulfill the elements of a crime, if we file a criminal case and we don't have a victim or can't prove one of the other necessary elements, we're unable to file the charges. So I think, honestly, that covers most of the questions, if not all, that were submitted to me online. I do want to make it really clear, in case people haven't heard me say it already, we do take these cases very seriously. We understand the harm it's doing and continues to do. And I think right now I'll just turn it back over to Dion. I think I went a little overtime, but I appreciate everybody's being here with an open heart and an open mind today. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, my system was moving a little bit slow. My apologies. Thank you so much, District Attorney Frugoli. We appreciate your sound and your extremely informational share prior to going into greater dialogue concerning these matters. Thank you for addressing many of the questions that we actually have currently in the Q&A box. So I wanted you all to know there were several questions. We had made a decision earlier because we want everyone to know what the questions were, what the context was, that we will create a fact sheet that will be available to all of the Marin County residents once this session is completed. I want to briefly answer a couple of the questions that I saw in the Q&A box that have nothing to do with the politics or the subject at hand. Miss Erica, you asked who I am. My name is Dion Jackson. For those of you who may have joined a little bit late, I am owner operator of an organization called Increase Media Business Solutions. What I am doing currently is my professional role. So I'm a very non-biased person in this discussion, very neutral, which helps to navigate through the context of the information that we're discussing on tonight. And again, so Dion Jackson, Increase Media. Also, a few people asked if the questions would be available. Lori was gracious enough to answer, which we assume that multiple of the responses or the questions would be duplicate in nature. And so we want you to know that no one is throwing rocks, hiding their hands on tonight. This conversation is expected to be extremely transparent from both a professional, informational level, from an experiential perspective, as well as a individual Fairfax, Marin County, Marin City community participants. So your questions will be answered thoroughly. I am extremely confident in that. Hopefully, many of the questions that are in the Q&A box currently were answered with Lori's address, and I'm believing that they will be completely fulfilled as we continue the dialogue tonight. Thank you again, each of you, for your patience. As we prepare to go into the next segment, and Lori, you can give me a head nod, yes or no, we have allotted a specific amount of time for each individual to share who they are after their brief introductions, to share their organization and the organization's history, if they're a community member, to share how they contribute in your particular community. And keeping in mind, this is a room full of your friends, family, loved ones, strangers, familiar folks. But by the time tonight is over, I'm confident that you all will know one another quite a bit better. My question for you, Lori, is do we want to proceed with Craig first, or do we want to begin with Tavea?
I think we should go ahead and let Craig speak. It's kind of fills in the rest of the story of what, as prosecutors, we look for in these hate crimes. And I just want everyone to know we did change the format a bit last minute. So I'm very appreciative of Dion and everybody else on this panel who has pivoted with us with these changes. But I think it made it a greater evening. So thanks.
Awesome, awesome. All right. Again, we want to share with you a perspective from a special agent in charge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, San Francisco Division. I want to introduce to some and to present to others, Craig D. Fair. Mr. Fair, we hand it to you.
Great. Thank you, Dion. And I appreciate the invitation, District Attorney. So my name is Craig Fair, and I'm the special agent in charge of the San Francisco division of the FBI. So under me, I have about 850 individuals, personnel in my office, who work a variety of federal violations throughout Northern California, from the Carmel border up to Oregon. So what do we do in the FBI? We work approximately 300 different federal violations, and that includes counterterrorism, domestic terrorism, public corruption, crimes against children, everything from the Migratory Bird Act to white-collar crimes. It's an exceptionally broad portfolio of what we do here, and we're very busy here in Northern California on all of those violations. Civil rights is among the top priorities for my division. But first and foremost, I want to begin by acknowledging the pain felt by this community in the aftermath of several events in Marin County. I'm also a Marin County resident. I'm in Corte Madera, and I have been in that community for the last 24 years. Many of those incidents may have been motivated by racial, ethnic, or religious bias. It's one of the things that we look at in terms of evaluating it as a potential federal hate crime. So as the head of this office, the San Francisco division, I want you to know that we prioritize these investigations of bias-motivated crimes, also known as hate crimes, as some of the most important work that we do. So some statistics on a national and local level that I think are important. The Uniform Crime Report just came out. Since 2014, we have seen a rise in hate crimes, at least those that were reported. In 2014, nationally, there were locally in Northern California, there were 165 hate crimes that were reported, that we evaluated for potential federal adoption. In 2019, that had risen to 267. Important in that is understanding what the motivating bias is. And what we found in 2019, that the motivating bias was predominantly race and ethnicity. That accounted for 57% of those cases. Sexual orientation accounted for 24%, and religion, 16%. Marin County saw a slight increase in 2019 from the previous year, with 13 reported incidents. And I would say that represents one of the challenges for law enforcement, and that is reporting. When the Uniform Crime Report came out this year, there were 451 less law enforcement agencies that provided us with data. Reporting mechanisms are not standard, and we believe that hate crimes are woefully unreported for a variety of reasons. This is a very important event. I have done numerous events like this throughout the Bay Area over the past 10 years and throughout the interfaith community. And I thank you, you for having me here today.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Special Agent. We appreciate your input. Thank you for sharing your time with us on this evening. I want to make a really quick mention of the responses per selected speaker. There's a timer for your convenience that simply says, you'll see it in the info box. It says responding to hate crimes, racism, and anti-Semitism. That box will have a 2-minute timer countdown, so that no one is interrupted and feels as if they've been pressed or pushed. I would just encourage you to be accountable for self in taking note of that timer as it counts down, in an effort to be respectful and mindful of all of our time, all of the participants, and so that we can absolutely get to the Q&A and answer the questions that the community is asking effectively and efficiently. So with that said, I will share with you the very next speaker that we have. And I'm going to begin to ask a couple of questions, okay? All right, that being said, we have Miss Tavia as a Black woman who is also Jewish. Please share with us your life experience living in the city of Marin. And welcome back, Tavia. You'll have to unmute yourself. Let's do that. Try that one more time. And Jason, you can start the timer. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. This is a little bit out. Let me get here. So I need to take a moment because I thought Rabbi Leiter was going to explain my being asked by the Jewish community to be here.
I think that's correct. And I apologize to Via and also to Dion. I think this was the time when we were going to have, starting now that we've already introduced our FBI agent, going to have each person introduced. And we were going to start by asking Rabbi Leiter, who is the senior rabbi at Rodef Shalom, and have her introduce you to Via, because she thought that you would bring so much to the table, because not only of your religious beliefs, but also of your experience as a Black woman and a Jewish woman in the community. But I have a little bit of your bio, but first I want to ask and apologize for Rabbi Leiter. You are the senior rabbi at Congregation Kol Shafar. My apologies, Rabbi Leiter. And could you do us the honor of introducing your colleague, Tabia?
Thank you, Dee Fergoli. Again, I am Susan Leiter. I'm the senior rabbi of Congregation Kol Shafar in Tiburon, and I'm also here tonight on behalf of Congregation Rodef Shalom. and Gan Halev Jewish community of San Geronimo. We are all a part of the United Jewish community here in Marin. As DA Fergoli mentioned, tonight I have asked Tavia Barnes-Sankin, a resident of Marin and a member of Congregation Kol Shofar of over 30 years, to speak on our behalf tonight as we pursue racial and religious freedom and equality here in Marin. Tavia?
Thank you, Rabbi Leiter. I am a Jew by choice. I made the decision to convert 18 years ago, many years after my sons Aaron and Zach celebrated their bar mitzvahs. I converted because Congregation Kol Shofar had become a welcoming and safe community for me. During one of my discussions with Rabbi Darby in the preparation for my conversion, he asked me if I was prepared for people to hate me and wish me harm simply because I'm Jewish. I told the rabbi that as a Black woman, every day there were people who wished me harm, and I had learned growing up in Virginia and Texas to live with it. I assured the rabbi that I would be okay because I knew I would be in a community that had been helping to keep Black people safe my entire life, and we would simply protect one another. I had watched Jewish people risk their lives and actually die during the civil rights movement to protect the rights of Black people. Leaders of the Jewish reform movement were arrested with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Florida after they challenged racial segregation. My challenges in Marin include being stopped for driving while Black, having a white man threaten and yell at me not to come near him as I walked to my car parked beside his, my son Zach being stopped by a police officer to see if Zach had stolen his own car. It was clear to Zach that no car had been reported stolen. Yet as upsetting as these incidents may have been to my family, they pale in comparison to the massive discrimination and abuse experienced in Marin City by many of my Lawyers for One America clients. When I converted to Judaism in 2003, yes, I told the rabbi I would be okay. However, I did not anticipate the magnitude of the emotional distress I have experienced since 2016 as a Black Jewish woman. The killings in houses of worship, Christian churches, Jewish synagogues, and Islamic mosques were on the increase. Sacred places where we should feel safest were not safe anymore. The toxic rhetoric against Blacks and Jews has been unbridled with no check in sight. That is until May 25th, 2020, the day George Floyd was cruelly murdered before our eyes. The white world got a first-hand glimpse of what it is like to be Black in America. Most white people were appalled. Most white people are not aligned with the intolerance of neo-Nazis and white supremacists. I believe in my heart and soul that most people in America, truly most people tuned in on this conversation today, strive for tikkun olam, to make the world a better place. On January 6th, people of all faiths and races watched TV for over 12 hours as predominantly white people wearing emblems of racism, neo-Nazis, and white supremacists stormed the US Capitol, threatened to kill members of Congress, and attempted to overturn a free and fair election in the most sacred place of our democracy. 8 days following the attempted insurrection, Kol Shofar hosted a virtual forum to check in with our congregation. Our rabbis asked us, how were we coping? How were we keeping safe in light of recent events at the Capitol? Our collective emotions were raw. We broke out into small virtual rooms for more informal and heartfelt conversations. The overwhelming sentiments were fear, anxiety, and angst. Was the history of the Holocaust about to be repeated itself in the United States? This time democracy prevailed. But what would happen if the next insurrection attempt were successful and democracy were no more? It has now been nearly 1 month since January 6th. We are all together again in another virtual conversation about hate crimes, racism, and anti-Semitism, all intrinsically caused by a false belief in the superiority of one race over another. No person is innately superior over another person. Our hope is that today's community conversation will be the opening for all races and all religions to truly see the humanity of all people with the common goal of eliminating hate, systemic racism, and anti-Semitism in our county and in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tavia, for sharing. We let you run a little bit lengthy simply because I was looking at the last updated agenda prior to the modification before we started the conversation. Nevertheless, just another really quick reminder for each panelist to be responsible in checking the timer. It's there and in place simply so that we can manage and maintain the conversation in such a way that we can effectively get to our Q&A session, keeping in mind that there are 326 people currently online. That being said, our very next speaker thereafter is sorry, my apologies. Our next speaker is going to be Mr. Seth Burks, again, the Regional Director of the Anti-Defamation League. Seth, I know you have a bit more time. You are 5 to 7 minutes, so we'll give you that. Oh no, Alexandria, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Seth, it's in your hands.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, DA Fragoli, and to all of you for attending tonight. I'm going to try to establish some basic definitions and help us understand the topic at hand. So first, I'm going to share my screen. And just talk a little bit about the topic of anti-Semitism and hate. So first, a definition, which I'll let you read. But in essence, anti-Semitism is hatred of Jews for a variety of ways, in a variety of ways. It can be targeted at an individual, at the group, at property, institutions, facilities, and in the community. But it is and sometimes referred to as the oldest hate, and so it can sometimes be complex. So this definition, which was developed by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, features some very helpful examples. So some expressions are appearing before you now. So as I mentioned, it's from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which was formed by a conglomeration of over 36 countries, including the United States, to try to help remember and protect the memory of the Holocaust and to prevent it and other forms of hateful expression from ever occurring again. And you can see some are expressions of hatred against Jews, which would be relatively easy to understand or to recognize. Things that we consider classic, if you will, expressions of anti-Semitism, conspiracy theories, dehumanizing, demonizing theories, stereotypes about Jews controlling the media, the economy, the government, or accusations about Jews being responsible for real or imagined issues. But also in some cases, and again, I stress in some cases, criticism of Israel or Zionism, which is masking the expression of anti-Semitism. So for instance, denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination or applying double standards to Israel vis-a-vis other countries. Now, again, I want to emphasize not all criticism of Israel is illegitimate or an expression of anti-Semitism. But I think it's important that we understand that it manifests in many different ways. Now, anti-Semitism has been on the rise in recent years. You heard that from Special Agent Fair. Here are a reflection of the anti-Semitic incidents that have taken place each year over the last decade. ADL tracks anti-Semitic incidents through an annual audit that we conduct. And as you can see, there's been a sharp increase in the last 3 years that we have on record. We have not completed our report for 2020. But in 2019, you see there were over 2,000 incidents recorded across the country. This is the highest number of incidents we've ever recorded in over 4 decades of tracking this information. And you can see the years before those were also extremely high numbers of anti-Semitic incidents that were reported. Now, like hate crime, we believe that these incidents are underreported. And the types of incidents that are reflected here reflect a single incident. So, for instance, if you see there may have been a mass shooting, for instance, in 2018 at the Tree of Life Synagogue. That's a single incident, although there are obviously many victims and targets of that incident. It also reflects both legal expressions of hate and anti-Semitism and illegal expressions. So we heard about people expressing hatred through yelling or distributions of flyers or other things. We want to be able to track that information because we know that it doesn't constitute a hate crime, and yet we want to be able to study it. You also heard that sometimes in the prosecution of a hate crime, it's important to have a greater understanding of other incidents that are taking place in the community that may help to lead to a hate crime enhancement charge. And so it's vitally important that we gather this information, which we do by direct reports that are received by ADL through our online portal, through tracking the media, and through our work with law enforcement. Now, I'm going to apologize. There's going to be some disturbing images you're about to see. So these are various expressions of hate that have happened over the course of the pandemic. You can see a false flyer that was distributed that was so realistic looking that the CDC felt it was necessary to label it as false. You'll notice that it targets not only Jews, but also Muslims, people from, as they term it, diverse neighborhoods, as well as people who attend synagogues. You'll see in the middle an allusion to a neo-Nazi group, the Atomwaffen, and they rebranded themselves as Corona-Waffen. And you also see the targeting of immigrants. All of these are expressions of hate in various forms, and some of them of anti-Semitism. We also see hate manifesting online. So here we've documented and tracked Zoom bombing, invading of Zoom meetings by individuals who mean to disrupt. And you can see here images actually taken from one of the first Zoom bombing incidents that's been documented in the country that took place in Marin County. And it even invades the space of online gaming. This is a screen grab from a game called Animal Crossing. It's one of, if not the most popular game on the Nintendo game system. And you can see somebody has spoiled the game, which is clearly, as you can see by the design, intended for young children. The one thing that unifies all of those incidents that you just saw, all of those expressions and examples that I just provided, is that none of them, under current law, constitutes a hate crime. Now, it's important, therefore, that we speak out against hate. And so ADL has this tool to help us explain why. We call this the pyramid of hate. Everybody is at the bottom. We all have biased attitudes in some way. We sometimes express them, we sometimes don't. And most people tend to mature and grow out of them and understand that they're wrong and start to moderate their behavior. But there are some people who act out on their bias and commit acts of bias. These may be legal expressions of bias, but bias nonetheless. From there, someone may be emboldened to engage in discrimination, crossing the legal line into illegal behavior, or to commit acts of violence and eventually genocide. Now, the idea is not that anybody who has a biased attitude will go on to commit genocide or even violence or discrimination or an act of bias, but it is one layer is built upon another. And so it's important to disrupt bias at its earliest possible moment. Our former national director was a Holocaust survivor. Abe Foxman used to say, Auschwitz, the infamous death camp that the Nazis constructed, was not built with bricks, but it was built with words. And so words matter, and it's important to disrupt it at its earliest possible moment. Now, we already heard about the report of the FBI hate crime report. These are incidents that cross the line into illegal behavior and that were tied to expressions of hatred. It is true that African Americans are consistently most targeted. Gay men are the second most targeted, but Jews are also consistently the third most targeted group, more targeted than all other religious groups combined. And we've, again, hate crimes, we've seen a significant increase in hate crimes targeting the Jewish community in parallel with the increase in hate crimes generally. Here you have a screen grab from the ADL hate crime map, which is an interactive map where you can go and look at the various statutes and hate crime incidents that have occurred across the country, and look back over time, see what types of hate have motivated them, and understand more about hate that might be existing in your community. Most disturbingly, in the last hate crime report, we heard that there were 51 hate crime murders, which is the most ever recorded, including the only murder recorded in the state of California of Lori Gilbert Kay, who was murdered at her synagogue in Poway, California. So there are a lot of things that you can do. The first and foremost is to educate yourself, and you've taken a great step by attending this evening's program. So we talk about speaking up, showing strength, and speaking out. So you see here, Antisemitism Uncovered, a guide that's online. We have resources and materials that are in various languages. Again, I encourage people, when hate does occur, to report the incidents. You may not think it's a hate crime, but it's important that you let the experts decide. There may be patterns of hate behavior that we're aware of, or that law enforcement may need to become aware of, that will be important. And again, education is critically important. So you see here BINA represented, Building Insights to Navigate Antisemitism and Hate. This is an interactive online course that we're going to be rolling out in the county of Marin beginning next month, in cooperation with the Marin County Office of Education. So many other pieces of information, sources that you can look to on the ADL website. I encourage you to visit them. And again, thank you for attending tonight and speaking up and showing strength.
Thank you so much, Seth. We appreciate your share. I know that the facts and the data are always important. They absolutely add color to every picture as we all work collectively toward a common goal. Really quick again, and I'll probably continue to do this as we move forward in the discussion and prepare to get to a place shortly of Q&A. But the district attorney thought that it would be very suitable for some of the representation of Marin County in general to be able to share perspectives as we have this large group of people. Again, we're now at 330 people that this topic is important to. So please don't be frustrated with the process, as the process is meant to bring clarity and surety and to bring acknowledgement that we recognize that this is a very heartfelt issue. So with that being said, our next guest this evening is going to be Alexandra Rosen, a Fairfax resident, again, speaking on behalf of the Fairfax Racial Equity and Social Justice community. Alexandra, if you are there, we are prepared to hear you. And I don't see her just yet.
Can you see me?
Oh, now I can, yes. Now, let me share this with you really quickly, Alexandra. As to maintain order, I'm going to go off camera. If you see me pop on camera, as opposed to me interrupting you, that just means kind of wrap it up for us, just to maintain time, please, ma'am, and thank you. And now we hand it to you.
Okay, so hi, my name is Alexandra Rosen. I am a Latina Jewish woman and a resident of Fairfax. I'm here on behalf of the Fairfax Racial Equity and Social Justice Committee. Speaking on behalf of myself, I'm not here to be a pawn in the game of politics or performative allyship. I am a brown Jewish person who is hurt, traumatized, and upset by the acts occurring in Marin County, and I'm simply here to use my voice. When I think about the current situation we are in, both as a country and as a county, it is clear to me that we are in a very important time for action. Since August alone, I can count roughly 9 actions of hate that were taken against marginalized communities here in Marin, and that's just the ones that were recorded or reported. Speaking to the elephant in the room, the recent swastika case is not an isolated incident, nor is the outcome an outlier. Time and time again, cases targeting marginalized communities are not prosecuted or taken seriously. The posting of swastikas in Fairfax is certainly an anti-Semitic act. It also symbolizes hate for gay, Black, trans, and Latinx folks. It scares all of us. Those communities are hurting, and the current perspective is that it is time for Marin County to step up and walk the walk. Discussions are helpful, but it can only take us so far. Action needs to happen, such as prosecution and restorative practices. According to the flyer, this event is titled Responding to Hate Crimes, Racism, and Antisemitism in Marin. That is a loaded topic, and in my personal opinion, cannot be talked about in an hour-and-a-half meeting. These topics deserve the space and the time to be discussed and thought out. Yes, anti-Semitism and racism can share similar characteristics, but they are not mutually exclusive. Colorism is ever present in our society. People with lighter skin receive certain privileges that those with darker skin will not. Being an Ashkenazi Jew does not mean that you have any less trauma or that you have not faced discrimination. It simply means that you will benefit from your lighter skin in a way that someone like me does not. Therefore, when speaking about racism, there comes a point where one cannot speak on behalf of a Black or brown person simply because they are Jewish. Additionally, let's look at the swastika case again. In this video, Noah very bravely follows the perpetrator and vocalizes his anger about the situation. This is a perfect example of someone who is an ally using their privilege for good. He did not have to disclose the fact that he is half Jewish. He bravely did, but he has the privilege to choose when to share that information and when not to. Now imagine if a Black or brown person saw this event happening. They would be faced with the task of putting themselves in harm's way because there's no hiding the fact that they're the color of their skin. Someone putting up swastikas could immediately physically or verbally harm them, or when the police showed up, it is not completely wild to think that they could be framed or reported for being violent by the perpetrator. It was mentioned at the Res J meeting that many feel like someone must be physically harmed for it to be taken seriously by those in positions of power. At which point the trauma is already done and many feel less inclined to report to the police because they have suffered enough. Adding the harm of facing a DA who will not prosecute will only add to the trauma. I'm not an attorney, so I recognize that there are things that I do not fully understand. However, when it is stated in the IJ that the Fairfax police chief had requested for the DA to look at charges including terrorism, civil rights violations, vandalism, and hate crime, and then the DA puts out a statement simply saying there's not enough evidence to prosecute, something tells me that's not the full story. I would expect an explanation for why there is not enough evidence to prosecute for each of those 4 potential charges. Leaders in our government are elected on the grounds that they aim to serve our community. Transparency and holding themselves accountable is part of the job. Now, let me be clear, going back to prosecute this man will not necessarily solve the problem. It is certainly a missed opportunity, especially knowing that restorative justice can only be issued by the DA after the charges have been made. However, what Marin County needs is to create a lasting solution that not only allows for justice to be served, but to take preventative measures to make all of our community feel safe on a daily basis. Really quickly, I would also like to address the ADL comments that the Fairfax Racial Equity and Social Justice Committee has received from the public. Due to the Brown Act, we as a committee could not communicate and did not have time to have a meeting to discuss this further. I did not feel comfortable making the decision to back out of this panel on behalf of the committee without speaking to them. I do want to make sure that you all know that you were heard and in no way did I work with the ADL, nor did I have any communication with them. They have not heard my statement prior to this moment, and I had not heard anything that they would be speaking about until previously. I appreciate the effort to put together this meeting, and I truly hope that this was not to fill a certain diversity quota. Conversations surrounding marginalized communities cannot happen without those who live the experience and feel the effects daily. I look forward to more meetings like this in the future that include the voices of those who we do not often hear from. Thank you.
Amazing job, Alexandra. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for sharing your voice. Thank you for your youthful response. It is refreshing to hear young people actively engaged in community activism and advocacy. It made my heart smile as a mother. We are in the process of moving forward with our next panelist. I want to introduce to some and present to others, Miss Morgan Bloom Schneider. Morgan, it's in your hands.
Thank you for that introduction. And I'm really proud as the director of the Jewish Family and Children's Services Holocaust Center to lead our community and more than 25,000 students and teachers each year to remember with responsibility. I take that phrase seriously, as I myself grew up in Marin and I hold the community very close to my heart. I take great responsibility. We at the JFCS Holocaust Center are dedicated to guiding a community that is struggling with hate and anti-Semitism. It goes back to our very establishment in 1979, when the Holocaust Center was created in response to an anti-Semitic incident in the Sunset District of San Francisco. What should a community do when faced with a hate crime? We feel we should, 1, focus on the education of our children and youth, 2, put our resources towards the training and support for our teachers in schools, and 3, encourage our elected leadership to protect our community against hate crimes. Regarding this case in Fairfax, I am not an attorney, therefore I'm not qualified to determine if this recent incident was in fact a hate crime. That is the role of our elected officials. What I will acknowledge is that people in our community are suffering and they are upset. The recent acts of anti-Semitism in Marin County schools were the inspiration for the establishment of the JFCS Confronting Anti-Semitism series. I've seen the questions pour in, what are we doing? I can respond to what we're doing on the educational front. Our program is offered in partnership with the Marin County Office of Education. I had a conversation with Superintendent of Schools, Mary Jane Burke, over the summer as these things were coming to the surface, and together we put our heads together with her fabulous team to create a series of programming. We're just coming to the end of series 2 of 3 series, and we've learned a tremendous amount. Just last night, Marin resident and survivor Anita empowered more than 100 students and parents in a virtual family education program. Many of those families that were in attendance are Marin residents, and we struggle on how to discuss anti-Semitism, racism, and discrimination at home. We're trying to help facilitate these conversations. We don't have the answers, but we're trying to guide this conversation. We've designed programming for 4 different audience groups. If you've ever put everybody in a room together, you know you must speak to your specific audience. And so last week on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we ran a student workshop for more than 500 students, most of whom were from High School 1327, formerly known as Drake. In a post-program survey, 70% of student participants shared that following the workshop, they now feel more confident to respond to hateful content they see both online or here in person. It's a slow and steady process, but together as a community, we are making an impact. In the fall, we ran a workshop for school administrators on how to identify and address anti-Semitic acts in our communities. I'll say I was inspired to see principals and superintendents from all throughout Marin County in this workshop. When we surveyed these school administrators and asked them, had they seen an anti-Semitic incident in their community over the past 2 years, 90% reported yes. It's a sobering statistic. It's upsetting, but it's also insight that these conversations, like the one tonight, we're having in our community, in our classrooms, and at our dinner tables is absolutely essential. I feel it's also essential to discuss the history of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred, as Seth so articulately explained, as when we see the resurgence of hateful symbols such as swastika graffiti on the walls and desks of our schools, in our public spaces, and of course, as it appears on the internet and social media, I feel it is important not to forget that this very symbol of the swastika can represent the racially based anti-Semitism that perpetrated the Holocaust. And the posting of the swastika glorifies and celebrates the perpetrators of the Holocaust, as well as a clear expression of hate today. I want to acknowledge that the posting of the swastika is upsetting to not only to members of the Jewish community, but to all of humanity. I believe these acts of hate are the true intersection of racism and anti-Semitism. I'm going to just share with you my screen quickly so that you can see how you can get in touch with us at the Holocaust Center. We're just getting started, and I've never been more proud than I am today to work with Jewish Family and Children's Services. As we help more than 120,000 clients each year through crisis due to wildfire, economic instability, lack of food, disease, and confronting anti-Semitism, we continue to strengthen our individuals and our families in our community across the Bay Area, and are a lifeline for people facing personal crisis or challenges. If you're learning about the work of the JFCS and the Holocaust Center tonight for the very first time, please know that we are here to support you and the community as a whole. I hope to see you and your children at a future program, perhaps the teachers in your school as well. I'm honored to be part of today's panel, and I look forward to this important and necessary conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Morgan, for sharing what your organization provides, and also sharing your availability and access. Now we're going to have Miss Patrice O'Neill, again, founder of Dot in My Town. Patrice, go ahead.
Hi. So glad to be with everyone tonight. I just want to acknowledge all the previous speakers, and I think what Tavea said, to remind us that we are in historic times, that we are living through, and there is so much pain in this room and so much concern. And I am really glad to be in a room of people who care a lot about how we're going to stop hate and how we're going to address this urgent problem in our country. For context, I'm a filmmaker and CEO of Not in Our Town, NIOT.org. You can learn more about us there. We work with local communities around the country to stop hate, racism, build equity and inclusion. And what I've learned from hundreds of communities we've worked with over 25 years is that we have to use and leverage what is there in the law. That it was just not many years ago that we finally passed the federal hate crime laws. We have hate crime laws in California. We had them before the James Byrd, Matthew Shepard Act, but the law is not enough. We have to act as a community to prevent hate crimes. My context of working in Marin, I'll just tell you this brief story. I was asked in 2016 by members of Rodef Shalom to introduce Not in Our Town in the community. My first screening that we did at the JCC, I started hearing really disturbing stories of anti-Semitism, particularly experienced by children and young people. And it was shortly after that that we started hearing this increase and ramped up anti-Semitism, which is a reflection of a deepening ideological fermenting of anti-Semitism and its place in white supremacist ideology and its spread online and across the country. We don't have time to talk about that now, but it's something that I think we all need to be aware of. that the role of anti-Semitism in its ideology in driving these movements that we saw on January 6th. Public displays of swastikas and hate messages have been going on for a long time, but they are appearing everywhere and much more frequently. If you haven't seen SPLC's year-end hate report that just came out yesterday, I hope you look at it. They have a special section on flyering. Just know that these groups know exactly what they're doing and how to leverage their rights under the First Amendment. We were just on a conference last week with new Not in Our Town groups around the country, and many of them started because of flyering like this, because of incidents like this, swastikas at an elementary school in a group in Northport, New York. So before I got on this call, I was editing a film about Pittsburgh in the aftermath of the Tree of Life Synagogue. It was really the mindfulness about what we saw in Marin and other communities that made us go immediately to Pittsburgh in the aftermath of the attack, where 11 people were lost in an attack at Tree of Life Synagogue, and to start that film, which we've been working on for 2 years. And in the film, we were working on just before I came on this call, the community is grappling with these two issues that are so prevalent in our country now, the Second Amendment and the First Amendment. How do we deal with this rise in hate speech and how it is spreading this toxic messaging, dehumanizing messaging that is leading to violence? And I think as we move forward in our communities, having serious, deep discussions about how we address this challenge of First Amendment, and I'm sure the framers did not anticipate Facebook, the rise in social media, and I know that Seth has spoken about this, and the ADL is working on this issue, as are many other organizations. How do we address this as a community, as a country? So these are much larger, bigger discussions, but I think we have to leverage everything we've got. And for our part, we want to help and support community level response. And I'll just say that I've met Lori many times, and before she was even elected and after she was elected, she came to me and said, how do I do more as a district attorney to engage the community for issues that I cannot address in the justice system, because we have to deal with this rising problem of hate. And she's a member of the Not in Our Town group in Novato, where they are doing some innovative work on hate crime reporting and response. So I think if you look at some of the groups that are forming, some of the diversity and inclusion groups that are in many parts of the county, the Not in Our Town groups in Novato and San Rafael, these are community members that are coalescing and saying, what do we do to respond to hate in the absent to hate incidents? As we saw, there's a difference between a hate incident and a hate crime. And it is frustrating, I think, for any of us who want to stand up to hate, to know that the justice system only does not have the full remedy that we need to address this serious problem. I did a film that I hope you can watch. You can watch it for free. It's called The Prosecutor's Stand, where we followed a prosecutor in San Francisco with 3 cases that he took that had incredible evidence against a transgender woman, an immigrant who was beaten horribly by people who had white supremacist neo-Nazi material on their computers, and a homeless African-American man. He lost all of those cases. And the hate crime laws are really hard to prove. That is a feature of the law. So, I think it's a challenge that we face. I hope that you listen to and engage with some of the folks from Nevada and learn about their efforts to start a hate and bias response team in their community that both leverages what can be done with the law, but more importantly, thinks about how the whole community can respond to and prevent hate crimes and deal with incidents as they occur. So thanks for the opportunity. And I am so moved and hopeful by the tremendous response in this community to these incidents.
Absolutely. Thank you, Patrice, for sharing. As an African-American woman, the number of people that showed up for this tonight is very humbling and very heartwarming, to be honest, and to hear all of the different organizations that are actively involved in trying to be part of the solution and not a part of the problem. Thank you all for being patient as we share panelist information. We are at our final dialogue for this portion of the conversation. And I again want to introduce some and present to others. Mr. Noah Griffin, again, a local resident historian, one of the leaders in changing that name of the Dixie School. Noah, we will hand it to you at this time. Do I not see Noah? Okay. All right. So I'm not seeing Noah present. I'm not sure if he. Oh,
okay, I think I'm on now. Thank
there
you.
he is. Thank you. All right. No, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, Deanna. And thank you, DA Fragoli, for the opportunity to be here as well. It's ironic that we're meeting today when there was no law that could exclude, I suppose, one of the most disruptive members of the House of Representatives, but she was ostracized today. She was removed from her committees, Marjorie Taylor Greene, for anti-Semitic remarks that were beyond the pale, violence-spouting remarks. And I look back over the history of this country, when I think of my father's father, who was born in 1852 as a slave, who bartered for agricultural goods to learn to read and write, who spawned my father, the last of 14 children, in 1896, born the year of Plessy versus Ferguson, which changed the arc of American history from 1896 to 1954, when the Supreme Court outlawed segregation in schools in Brown versus Topeka School Board. And I think of the whole arc of my family in terms of trying to seek justice, having an idea of what they wanted to do with their lives, but being turned around by what they had to go up against. My father was an educator, so was my mother. He graduated at Fisk University in 1923, went and picked up his master's in 1926 at the University of Iowa, worked on his doctorate at the University of Indiana, came back to teach eventually in the Florida State school system, where they were paying Black teachers 47% of what they were paying white teachers by law. My father opened up a lawsuit at that case. He engaged Thurgood Marshall, who he had taught at Lincoln University in 1929. They had lost in state court. Thurgood said, let's throw it out and try court under the 14th Amendment. They tried it for 6 years. My parents were barred from teaching for life because they actually won that case, and their lives were threatened. So my dad came out here Thanksgiving Day, 1944, to set up 11 regional states of the NAACP, including the first NAACP chapter in Marin City at the time. I remember so many incidents occurring while he was away, taking care of those things, and things that happen on a national basis. The most happiest day in my family's household was when my father came home with a newspaper about winning that 1954 decision. But shortly thereafter, in 1955, I remember my parents took me to Third Baptist Church to see the mother of Emmett Till talk about what had happened to her son, and seeing his picture on the outside of that program really brought racism home to me in a way in which no child should ever have to experience that. But next summer, we went through the state of Mississippi. My head was down under the level of the window in the train. I felt somebody's going to shoot in at me and take my life. I also remember the incidents that occurred beyond that. Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman, the alliance between the African American and the Jewish communities, I think back about the founding of the NAACP, where they're mostly Jewish founders of the NAACP, along with W.B. Du Bois, a man whose life spanned so much history. He was born in 1868 and Great Barrington, Massachusetts, when Frederick Douglass was the key spokesperson of America, Black America. In 1903, he wrote Souls of Black Folks in opposition to Booker T. Washington. He dies August 27th, 1963, the eve of the March on Washington, when the torch is officially handed to Martin Luther King. Thinking back about the connection between the African American and the Jewish communities, I think of Julius Rosenwald, who constructed 22 YMCAs and YWCAs so that Black folks could travel and have a place to stay in the segregated South. He further funded 1/3 of the litigation in Brown versus Topeka School Board. He was responsible for more than 5,000 schools, shops, and teachers' homes in the United States, and primarily for the education of African Americans. There has been this tie and connection where we need to be allies with one another. That swastika was just not aimed at the Jewish community. It was aimed at all of our communities, as was the Dixie School District. When you think about that, that was a 22-year struggle to finally, with the Alliance of Blacks and Jews, to eliminate the name of the Dixie School District, so offensive to African Americans, so offensive to anybody thinking a right way. To finally change it, to admit that it was racist. The things that went on in Tiburon, in the store, where Yema store there, the only Black store on Main Street, where he was questioned as to why he was there. Here's an individual who was designated the business of the year. And you can tell me that the police force didn't know who he was and why he was there, taking things in and out of his own store. Well, the town of Tiburon did the right thing. The police chief resigned. The officer involved resigned. I was just appointed last night to the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force. We want to take a look at these things. Marin County is listed the #1 inequitable county, not only in the area, but in the entire state. So until we take a look at these incidents, until we prosecute when we can, find out when we can't, make people pariah, don't keep silent in your own lives when you hear something, say something. It's important in interpersonal relations where people don't allow certain phrases to go unchallenged, unanswered. I display the American flag because I don't want people to think that it belonged to just one group of people. It belongs to all of us. My great-grandfather, my mother's side, fought in the Civil War, born in 1820. So, and one thing I want to just put out there before we go into questions and answers, if you haven't already, pick up the book Caste. It talks about race in a way in which you've never heard before, by Isabel Wilkerson. It is transformative. She basically talks about the fact that when people came to this country before, through Ellis Island, they were Italians, they were French, they were Poles, etc. But all of a sudden they created a whole category called white. Nobody was white before then. And now people take refuge in that so they can be better than at least some people that are underneath them. So there's many aspects of this thing called race, and we have to educate ourselves as we are this evening. I don't want to take up any more time because I know that we have to go to Q&A, but thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this panel.
No, thank you so much, Noah, for your wisdom and your grace in sharing and explaining your experience, as well as your care and concern. Here is the time I believe that everyone has been waiting for. Jason, if you would activate the hand raising option so that District Attorney Frugoli can answer some of the community questions. We know without a shadow of a doubt that it is important for you to be able to have a cadence and a tone in this conversation. And so I'm excited about that portion. And so as the people are selected via the hands raised, as to do it as fairly as possible, of course, this platform will give us a numeric capture of who chimed in and raised their hand first. We want you to know that we're acknowledging it in that direct order. There will be a few questions, and then there are a couple of additional questions online that we will take thereafter. Jason, if you can let me know who our first participant is, and you can take them off of mute, and you can actually chime in and share who is going to be addressed this evening. I believe we have Eva first, yes?
Yes, and just to be clear, is that 2 minutes per speaker or?
It's, yeah, do 150, and this is for you to pose your question and then give an opportunity for the panelists as well as the district attorney to respond effectively. Go ahead.
Okay, Eva, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Eva Crisanti here. I'm glad that you're doing a forum on this topic. I know that a lot of people were disappointed that this forum was taking place. They really wanted to see the crime prosecuted primarily. I want to bring up something else. I did a PRA request to the county, and I got demographic data for arrest referred to prosecution for all the law enforcement agencies in Marin County. But the standout is Marin County Sheriff. And it's pretty shocking. Over a 31-year period from 1990 through 2020, the arrest rates for whites is always below their demographic presence. The arrest rates for Black people in Marin County is absolutely through the roof. Latinos also do not do well under the sheriff, but it's pretty clear when you look at how Marin City has been treated by the Marin County Sheriff that there is an ongoing pattern of hate crimes. And I cite specifically permission from the Marin County Sheriff to let the Contra Costa SWAT team raid Marin City on November 14th, 2019. Less than a year later, the Marin County Sheriff permitted a 200+ Trump car caravan to invade and harass Marin City right outside their polling place, the Sunday before the election. So obviously, it's not just some lone guy putting up swastika stickers in Fairfax. There's a real pattern of harassment by the sheriff. And we're seeing that some of the sheriff deputies who have been accused and named in suits are now being named to chiefs of police. For example, Mill Valley just appointed Rick Navarro to their chief of police. So I take a closer look at what's happening in terms of hate crimes in this county, the broader pattern, and the fact that for decades this has not been investigated. And I would really urge, Frugoli has enormous broad powers. She has absolute immunity in terms of prosecution. So I would really at least ask that there would be some investigation of what's going on. Thank you so much. I guess that's my time up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ava. Thank you so much for sharing. We appreciate your comments. I didn't hear a question. So that being said, I don't know if Lori, you want to.
I did. I had a quick response, if that's all right.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I don't want to block other people, but I want to thank Eve for her comments. I do hear you, and I have heard these comments before. It's not the first time. I do want to be clear on a couple of things. The situation that happened in Marin City, the raid, that was search warrants were prepared by another county, and our county search warrants are prepared by our not only law enforcement, but are also overseen by my office before a judge sees them. So there may be a bigger level of scrutiny before that kind of conduct would occur in Marin, and certainly for us to obtain a search warrant. We are very careful with things like that and mindful of our community. And I know that was a frightening incident for many people. And we do, you have asked a lot of great information about the race of people who are arrested and prosecuted and how their cases are handled. And we actually have put much of that information on our website in order to be transparent. We've been working with a community group on becoming transparent and with what the means that we have within our current computer and data management system. And we're working with a community group to help us. We're also working with Measures for Justice to make our portal more transparent than it is, because they are important questions that you're asking and bringing up. And I know there's fear in the community. And I think that was my main points to you. And I really thank you for your comments.
Very good. Thank you so much. Ms. Tevia, did you want to respond to Ms. Ava's statement?
Yeah, I was pleased to hear her raise this issue. I referred in my remarks to the fact that the incidents that I had from my family paled in comparison to the abuse that my clients that live in Marin City have faced in this county for years and years. And while it is important to have the transparency and have the numbers up and displayed, I think the real question that was being asked is what is being done, because Black people and people of color in Marin City are disproportionately affected and part of the criminal justice system in Marin. And the numbers tell the story, as was just reported, but it's really the question, what's going to be done about it?
Very good. Thank you so much for that, Tavia, for that great share. We have our next online participant. If you would, Jason, if you'd go ahead and unmute.
Yes, next we have Mark, followed by Veronica.
Very good.
Mark, please go
All
ahead.
right. Thank you very much. I'm sorry we can't see each other in this event, but my name's Mark, and I'm the Jewish person from Fairfax who started the petition. And I'm just going to say that we do accept your apology of saying insufficient evidence as dismissive, and you've given us a chance to explain fully. But we're not here to educate ourselves, and I don't imagine many on the Zoom are. As Patrice says, she is glad to be in a room to stop hate. Here is the chance to take action against hate. I want to see the perpetrator, the Nazi perpetrator, investigated, brought to trial with specific consequences, not only for his behavior, but his ideology. So the DA, Laurie, you started tonight saying, and I quote, a hate crime like this. Seth defined anti-Semitism. A Nazi swastika is an anti-Semitic symbol of white supremacy and serves as the basis of a hate crime, as stated in the Penal Code 11411. So finally, two questions. Will Mike Perry's willingness to press charges be new information to advance the case? Secondly, and Noah can ask this question if you bring him on, it will be repeated. Will the recent Instagram evidence in the form of threats to Noah, death threats to Noah Moen delivered to the Fairfax Chief of Police enhance the case, lead you to reconsider your decision, and file criminal charges? The online gang connected to these Instagram posts should be pursued and stopped before a violent act takes place. Those are my two questions, please.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. And thank you for the questions that you submitted before. Number one, your question about on the private property with the swastika and the property owner. Any new information, including evidence or information that would help us fulfill a missing element of the crime, which is, in that case, the property owner's statement that they're the owner and did not give the person permission, would certainly be cause for us to reevaluate the case. No matter what the statement is, we will look at it and put it back in context and reevaluate the case from start to finish. And I apologize, I have not been able to review the Instagram statement a document that you're talking about with Noah. And we did invite Noah to speak here today, and I hope he's able to have his chance, because that was important to me that he'd be able to have say today. And I think that answers your two questions, but the crucial element that was missing, you clearly heard me, so I appreciate that. And yes, we will reevaluate it. Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Mark. You are appreciated. Veronica, it is now in your hands.
Thank you, Dion. Thank you, District Attorney Fergoli. And thank you also for all of the folks that have called in, and for our panelists for having the courage to speak up. I know for me, my heart beats fast thinking about engaging in this topic in a public way, knowing it's so necessary, but the intimidation of engaging with authority figures, and you're certainly making yourself feel very available to us, Lori, and I really appreciate it. I would love to ask, and perhaps it can be included in the fact sheet that was promised, what the special team that you said you are forming to address hate crimes looks like, who's on that team, and what steps do committees like the Racial Equity and Social Justice Committee in Fairfax, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force in Mill Valley need to take to ensure that the acts of overt white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and racism are able to be held up to justice with this team? I wonder in what ways we can be sure to be collaborating with them, to be informed, to understand, is there a capacity for us to establish local ordinances? That was something that we spoke about in our ResJ meeting last week. And to just remember, I'm grateful for Patrice, for you reminding us as members of this country, of this county, that we can take matters into our own hands in a lot of ways. And I am very excited about wondering, is there a way that we can, as crazy as it might sound, what ways might we address our state hate crime laws and urge our Congress members and our senators to publish bills that change the hate crime laws, that will allow those hate crime laws to actually protect our most vulnerable members of our communities? Because clearly, if we're not able to engage in this process of healing from this crime, specifically the incident of the swastikas getting posted, these hate crime laws are failing us. They're not working. We need to be changing them. And so I'm just curious, we would love your support and guidance around what that can look like for our local committees that are really committed to these types of actions. Thank you.
Veronica, thank you very much. And I appreciate your participation with my community group as well. The team I was speaking about to evaluate cases is within the office, and it will be headed by my assistant, District Attorney Otis Bruce. His primary job is, as my assistant, is to work on our transparency within the community, our communication within the community, and also social justice and equity. And it starts with not only equity in our community, but also in my office. And that's a priority for him. So he's going to convene a group of DAs in the office who are going to be out in the community. There's been we've been remiss in not getting out into the community as much as we could and should, especially during COVID. But we are committed to reaching out to all our community members. And I know there's been some requests today, which I appreciate, from our Jewish community leaders, that we can really have a face and interact with them and have direct lines of communication and really gain some trust from each other on how we can work together to stop hate, even if we can't prosecute a crime. So that, when I was speaking about the team, that was my one point for that, was that is an inter-office team to investigate things, and including, to Eve's point, that team is also going to investigate and look carefully at criminal charges, not only from San Quentin Prison, it's in our jurisdiction, but also any report that's brought to us, or when it's brought up by a defense attorney, of excessive force by law enforcement, that is going to be evaluated by that team as well. Any of those allegations are immediately brought to my attention, no matter what kind of case it is. And so I think that's important that people know and understand that. One thing I did want to say to Veronica, you mentioned before, and it was mentioned earlier, so I'm going to take the lead and say that restorative justice quite soon is not only just going to be something that happens in our schools, but when a person's on probation after they're convicted, we do have restorative justice practitioners who are going to be working with us, with my office, on community problems. And hopefully she'll be able to call in. Her name is Rochelle Edwards, and her partner is Lorenzo Jones, and they're restorative justice practitioners. And Rochelle is offered to be part of our crisis response team for Not in Our Town. So for example, when this case happened in Fairfax, Rochelle and other volunteers, after law enforcement was done their investigation, could have reached out to Noah and met with him and given him some resources and community support, so he didn't feel alone and ostracized by the entirety of what happened on that day. So that's something that we're working on in Novato. And so I just wanted to be clear that restorative justice is something that I do always have on my radar, whether it's the Fairfax case or any other cases. And I did want to clarify something I said that I've seen in the chat, some confusion. We don't protect children's conduct necessarily in juvenile proceedings, but it's the public information of what actually happened with their case that is protected. That doesn't mean that the children aren't made accountable when that's the situation and the course that's taken by our probation department. So I wanted to clear that up. Thank you.
Your next speaker is Bobby, followed by Mark. Bobby, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Bobby Mosky. I'm on a number of county committees with DHS and the Board of Supervisors, but I want to make it clear that I'm speaking only as a private citizen now. I did want to address the three cases you were talking about, but you cleared up most of the information as to where you're limited in terms of being able to prove intent in terms of hate crimes. So I understand that although these are outrageous crimes, they aren't always prosecutable. I did want to use the rest of my time to make a statement. I've been dealing with the sheriff department for the last number of years and on many other fronts. And I think it's very, very important that we as a community, as Marin County, you included District Attorney Fercoli, that all of us, including the Board of Supervisors, all the people at the DHSS and all the county agencies, vet the new sheriff candidates, because we do not want to repeat this nightmare. And believe me, I can tell you it's been a nightmare. I have personal experience with trying to get clients, trying to work with the sheriff department on medication assisted treatment, a number of other fronts, and it's been a road uphill, and it can't go on. We really have to vet the new sheriff before we install him, so we won't repeat this situation again. And I had one last quick question. Because you're so limited in being able to prosecute these hate crimes, because they are crimes, but maybe not officially crimes based on what you're able to prove, what do we do? What do we do to rectify that? Because I understand your arms are tied with the letter of the law based on what you're able to prosecute. That's.
I believe that may be a question for you, Lori.
I think it is. My apologies to our other panelists, but I think we knew this is, there were a lot of questions of me and I appreciate it. Number one, I think, Bobby, thank you. I'm quite sure there's going to be a very hotly contested election, and the community will have an opportunity to ask many questions and do their due diligence before they make such an important decision. And what can we do? One thing that Patrice and I have been doing is looking at legislation that's been passed in other states that we might be able to pass here. And frankly, so far, we're not coming up with much that so far isn't similar to what we've already had. California is ahead of a lot of states in the laws that we have. And that doesn't mean we can't create other ones, but there's not a lot of opportunity to, I guess, learn from others in that regard, I'd say. So, but we are always aware of that. And I have had discussions with county leaders and city leaders about having local ordinances. But again, that a city council would do that, and a city attorney would give legal advice on what would be a legal ordinance and what would not be a legal ordinance. So far, my understanding is that when a deep dive is done on some of the considerations, that it ends up coming in conflict with the Constitution, as we brought out earlier. So the other thing really on a granular level is, and so I've heard Seth say this before, this kind of conduct and this kind of education, it doesn't just fall out of the sky and in some child's mindset. They learn it from somewhere. If they don't learn it in their home, they learn it from school and their community or online. And I've heard Seth speak before about the dangers of really not knowing what your children are doing online. And that's something very important, especially now in the era that all our kids are on Zoom and they're frustrated and don't have an outlets. And sometimes kids are easily swayed online by people they don't even know. And I do think it's really important to honor the programs that the Holocaust Center and CES program is doing to educate our children at a young age. I certainly didn't get the education on the cultural historical damage that was done before I even went to school. And I have only learned some of these things of late, and I continue to learn. But the fact that children, our future generations, are being taught the dangers of this behavior and this mindset that one person or a race is superior to another one, I do hold that hope for our future and our youth, but I think it's really important that that work continue. And that work in Marin is a result of a hate report that came from Redwood High School, where somebody posted online they were taking the names of Jewish children in that school and keeping a list. And everybody knows how frightful that was for the community. I know people are frustrated because it was juveniles involved, but that people standing up and people talking about the lack of educating children in our community about that kind of behavior led to our children being educated in Marin. So that's the kind of thing that we can do and continue the teaching at home and in the community with your children's social groups.
Very good. Very good. Thank you so much for the question, Lori. We also thank you for the response. I just want us to be mindful of the hour. It's currently 6:55 p.m. The passion behind the pursuit of solution is time consuming. And time can lapse, certainly, with valuable information being provided and with heartfelt sentiment from the community. We want to get a few more of the questions, and I'm going to be 100% transparent right here. We're absolutely not going to be able to get to each and every one of the questions simply for time's sake. We're going to go over. However, please be mindful that there will be a provided FAQ sheet available after the discussion. There will also be updates, I'm sure, on the Marin County website with regard to if in fact there will be available viewing for this recorded session on tonight. That being said, Jason, will you announce the next two callers? And Lori, will you be mindful of our responses just so we can make sure we can get everyone in, because I don't want anybody to be frustrated.
Yeah, the next speaker is Mark, followed by George. Mark, please go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Lori. My name is Mark Galperin. I was one of the people who was voting for you when you have been elected and who celebrated with you your election. I have one question for you. Please clarify the following. Father Junipero Serra is a saint of the Roman Catholic Church. He was canonized as a saint just last year by Pope Francis. Catholic faithful, as you probably know, venerate images, icons, and statues. According to California AG, a hate crime is a crime against a person, group, or property motivated by the victim's real or perceived protected social group. I believe that Catholic Christians is a social group. So could you please explain to us how have you found the way to determine that vandalizing the statue of this saint is not a hate crime against Catholic Christians? Because this vandalism obviously abused feelings of multiple of thousands of Catholic Christians who live in our county, including Archbishop ruling in San Francisco. Thank you for your clarification. I'm listening.
Thank you very much. I hear you, and that's a complicated question. I can just tell you that we carefully evaluated the case and determined that that conduct was not really focused it could be seen was not really focused towards deterring people from practicing versus making a statement. And that was a case where we did have a victim who stepped up and wanted prosecution.
Next speaker is George, followed by Erica. George, please go ahead. George, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
What are the various panelists' opinions about the job that schools are doing to deal with the various kinds of discrimination, not only racism, but a whole variety of things that I'm not sure how good a job schools are doing. And if you are not satisfied with what schools are doing to deal with these issues, what do you suggest that we do to change the curricula to address these very important issues that are really corrosive for our society? Hi, Lori.
We will, oh, I'm sorry. Morgan sent me a message and stated that she can answer that, but certainly you can follow her up, Lori. Morgan, go ahead.
Thank you for the question. So I just want to say that it's a work in progress for the schools, and they've never had a more challenging time than they are now with the reopening because of COVID pandemic. But I will say that in Marin County, which I can speak to with this community has special interest, is there has been great progress, that they have identified the challenges in the community. They've identified and acknowledged the acts of anti-Semitism and racism in the community, and they are working hard providing professional development to the teachers and workshop opportunities, both with our organization, the Holocaust Center, as well as with the ADL and many other of our partner organizations. It's a slow and steady process. You may be following the ethnic studies challenges that are going on in our community. There's a lot of work to be done, but many people are passionate at trying to make change. Lori?
I think you said it all. It is a work in progress. There's always more to be done. And I know different schools, especially in Southern Marin, are really working on that.
Your next speaker is Erica. Erica, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Erica Heimberg. Have a little bit of an echo there. And I appreciate the opportunity to ask questions of you. I did submit questions and did not feel that they were previously all answered during your presentation, Lori. I would like to hear from you how you personally, as a leader, as an elected leader, commit to addressing the escalating acts of anti-Semitism and racism in our county. Thank you for sharing a bit about the committee you're forming, but I would like to hear more. And to communicating directly with the Jewish community and with people of color. What are you planning to do? Additionally, I would like to reiterate what Alexandra Rosen shared so eloquently, which was there were a number of potential crimes that the Fairfax police chief reported that he thought could be prosecuted. And you've shared why the crime that was caught on videotape was not prosecuted as a hate crime. Could you please address why no crime was prosecuted when other vandalism crimes are prosecuted in this county? That's it.
Sure, thank you. First of all, I'd be happy to meet with you and my assistant district attorney, so we could get some communication going with who we are not reaching out to and who we need to connect with. I'm committed to doing that, and that is the team of people that my assistant is going to be dealing with from my office, and it's not just attorneys, it's the entirety of my staff who are going to be reflected, and it's a diverse group who's going to be working in the community. So we're committed to that, and I'm happy to listen to people on what we should be doing to better communicate, certainly with our community of color and also the Jewish community, obviously. So I have had some meetings on other topics with other religious leaders, and of the Interfaith Council, and we're going to be working on some drug safety programs with them. And so we obviously need to expand our communications and what we're really talking about. So I'm happy to do that, happy for suggestions. We know we all know we can always do better, and we're willing to do that. Sometimes we might not know a door needs to be open because we don't see the door. So it's really important that people speak, let us know. I think you all have my email, so that I think that answers that question to the best I can, and I'm open to any options and suggestions that people have. So that's the one thing. And the second thing is we sometimes when law enforcement thinks a crime has been committed, they don't know what we know. Sometimes extra investigation happens by my office. We learn additional factors. And it's, for example, as brought up by the other man, there was a request that the statue destruction was filed as a hate crime, but we determined it didn't meet that criteria when we looked carefully at the law and at the facts of the case. And so sometimes things change. The other thing is law enforcement has a different standard when they arrest someone or even send something up for criminal charges. They have a reasonable cause standard or probable cause standard, and our standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. And somebody asked, what, it's not the concern about the conviction that we're looking at, it's our ethical obligation that we should not file a charge, and it would be unethical if we knew we couldn't prove an element of a crime. That makes it a non-provable case at the start. And so it's our ethical obligation to carefully look at these cases because of the consequences for everybody. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Next speaker is Lynn. Lynn, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I heard a rather detailed or seemingly detailed discussion of how children are treated with regard to hate crimes. And it was a discussion in which I understood that basically these sorts of considerations in terms of what children have done or not done are actually quite subtle when it comes to white people. Now, you get a situation like a 9-year-old Black girl being thrown around by police, by officers, as if she's a bag of beans. And suddenly everybody's just like, oh, well, that's in the background. I mean, that's not really that important. I mean, we haven't had an uproar. We haven't had an outrage. This girl said she was a child and she was telling the truth. And she certainly wasn't treated like a child. I guess what I'm really getting at is that it's an inertia in the system that really encourages and perpetrates the kind of discrimination into racism that we are trying to confront. And I feel that we're still not confronting it at all, not nationally, and perhaps not locally. You have the Golden Gate Village situation, where a village in Marin City wants to determine its own rules, its own regulations, its own way of running itself. And there's a huge resistance to that. This happens systematically, locally, state, nationally. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm not really asking a question. I'm simply pointing it out.
Okay, our next speaker is Noah. Noah, please go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So like Mark said, the people who are watching this forum aren't the people that need education. It's the people that want answers and justice. District Attorney Fergoli, I feel that most of us attending this see that you use this as a forum to dismiss the case and move on from it. The timing of this announcement that you will not press charges against the 19-year-old defacing our town also disappoints me deeply. I have heard no legitimate answers publicly or directly from Fergoli about the swastika case and the decision behind abandoning it and dismissing it as insufficient evidence. And I feel that we are being let down as a community. I have received many threats on my life and my family's lives, and I feel that they are connected to the person who I caught putting up these stickers. Fergoli has been aware of these threats since around Thanksgiving, and I just want to know what will be done with these threats and how will they be followed up on. Thanks.
Thank you, Noah. I'm glad that you were able to get in. I was worried because I know we had a conversation and I committed to you that you should speak today, and I'm glad that you did. And I do hear you. I want to be really clear. Charges were never filed, and so they were never dismissed. We have up to 1 year to file charges. If it were to be a misdemeanor, you would only suffer one dismissal, and that would be it by law. So that case is still open. It still is considered under investigation. And I'm sorry, I haven't had a chance to look at your most recent contacts that you're talking about, the threats. And I don't remember if I ever saw a follow-up from you after Thanksgiving. I think actually I did. You did send us some things. So please, I do want you to know we do take this seriously. And I know there has been some miscommunication, and there also, we discussed, and it's a public record, there are a lot of things sometimes we're not able to say when we're investigating a case, and we do take a lot of factors into account. If it's the person who's accused, if they've had a prior record, if we can see if they've received treatment or been gotten help for a mental or physical disability. There's a lot of things that we take into account, including restorative justice. So I just want you to know that it was not dismissed, but it clearly was never filed either. So that doesn't mean that option isn't on the table. And I hope that you stay safe. And I know that you stepped up that day, and your actions were the epitome of what Not in Our Town stands for. You literally said the words, and we all heard them. And we do take them seriously. So, and I will be looking at the evidence that we received from the Fairfax Police Department as soon as I can. So thank you.
Lori, we're at 10. Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. We are at number 10 with regard to our Q&A section, which we had absolutely committed to. Of course, we are currently over time, but there are still questions on the floor. I also want to encourage all of those that are on the remaining 191 participants. Please, ma'am, please, sir, if you would be kind enough, if you did not have an opportunity to share your question verbally, if you would list your question, concern, comment, or commentary in the Q&A box for that later stated and documented fact sheet so that we can provide you with the questions that were asked, and that one by one over a period of time, they can all be answered. I think we all knew tonight that we would not be able to conclude everything in this 2-hour allotted time. However, Lori, there are a couple of additional people that you wanted to connect with briefly before we conclude for this session. Is that accurate?
It is, but I don't know if they've been able to get through.
Okay.
If Jason doesn't have them, then I don't think we have them.
Okay. So can we do this really quickly? I think there are a couple more questions. Hey, Jason, if you can do 2 final questions as we wrap up, and then Lori, you can have, we'll have the panelists each give their concluding messages after those 2 questions.
Okay, I would just like to, if we could back up before that. Alexandra just indicated she needed to leave, and I wanted to thank her and honor her for being here. I'm sorry there might have been some reaction to that. I appreciate your voice here at the table, and if you wanted to say something really quickly before you leave, please do so.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I very much appreciate having a place in this conversation and being included. I would like to echo the reaction of the public based on what I've seen in the Q&A. I think that there is still a very clear lack of transparency. And the fact that Noah has been threatened multiple times and that has not been looked at is extremely concerning to me, and also reflects what I have noticed about the lack of urgency when it comes to hate acts. So thank you very much for the time and the space. And I look forward to, as I mentioned before, I look forward to meetings like this to continue so that we can truly get to the root of the problem. Thank you.
Your next speaker is Leonard. Leonard, please go ahead. Leonard, you'll need to unmute.
Thank you. My name is Leonard Shaw. I live in Novato. I spent 5 years as the assistant district attorney here in Marin County. Earlier this evening, a private citizen whose name is Mark pointed out that one of these stickers apparently was posted on private property, and he had personally apparently determined that the owner or occupant of that private property was willing to step forward and be a complainant, and the Lower District Attorney indicated that that would be further investigated. And my question is, during the course of the investigation, did you determine on how many pieces of private property there had been the Nazi sticker with the threat, quote, "We are everywhere," close quote? How many private properties were affected by this individual, and what has your investigation determined as to how many of those owners or occupants would be willing to step forward as complainants? I want to also say that it's come to my attention that the petition that Mark started apparently has over 1,000 people who have signed. I believe that's because the people believe that where there has been a wrong, there should be a remedy. And I think what you're telling us this evening is that so far your office has not been able to find a remedy in this situation. Not a trespass, not a malicious mischief. You've explained, I think, why you did not proceed with a hate crime prosecution. But people are looking for some way to get this sort of conduct penalized under some sort of control, to get this individual some help, which he obviously needs through the criminal justice system. So I sent you a question, which was generally what I just said, but if there is no way that we can prevent this type of conduct from occurring in the county, from Novato down to Sausalito, people coming through the downtown areas and posting these sorts of stickers, I think we need to know that, and you need to make that clear to the public.
Thank you, Leonard. I appreciate your questions and your comments. I think any case with stickers or any type of potential vandalism is going to be looked at on its own. We obviously don't encourage that anywhere. And that is always a consideration that we have, and it was a consideration in this case as well. The situation with the owner of the property, we would need that property owner to agree to prosecute. The last information I had from law enforcement was that that was not the position that where they were at. So if that's changed, then law enforcement should let me know. And I know you have a very small town in Fairfax, and if that is the case, I'm sure, and I'm sure Chief is listening right now, so I'm sure he will follow up on that for us. So, and I'm only aware of, and I may be corrected, but I'm only aware of one private property where the sticker, that swastika sticker, was placed. So I hope that answers your question.
Next speaker is Rochelle. Rochelle, please go ahead. Need to unmute.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. So I'm really happy to be here tonight and just to be a part of this community that takes these issues seriously and is willing to come together and grapple with a solution. I also want to just thank community members and District Attorney Fragoli and also Otis Bruce. My name is Rochelle Edwards. I have a nonprofit organization called the Transformative Justice Institute, and we bring restorative justice practices into our communities to support healthy communication, resolution of conflict, and all in order to repair and restore relationships. I have been working with the county to create a restorative response team in situations like this where we can help, set out a team and we can get a greater understanding of the needs of all who have been harmed and address the needs also of those who've created the harm. If we are saying that we want a healthy, safe community, then we're going to have to consider using new practices that address the root causes of harm and address the impacts on communities and give responsible parties who created the harm a way back. I don't know about you, but I do want to live in a community that works to understand reasons for harm and the importance of healing versus tossing its members away. Real briefly, restorative justice practices include community circles, education, restorative dialogues, and making amends for the harm. And the crimes that we're talking about tonight all shine a light on the fact that these types of ruptures between individuals or groups of people is a problem that has historical roots and that can't be fixed by ignoring this reality or going through just legal means alone. So I would love to see and be a part of our community response that can create a restorative response that allows us to address these types of crimes head on and holistically so we can work to repair and restore relationships. And I just want to say also that because one of the things that I've been doing, San Quentin has been my home away from home for the last 20 years. And I've also worked with CDCR as a victim offender mediator or dialogue facilitator. And I honestly don't know anything that is more tough on crime than someone who has created harm to be able to come face to face with those who are impacted by the harm and by the crime. Because in that process, people have to dig deep. They have to understand how they got to that place. They have to connect the dots of their lives. And they have to do some real work. And that's what creates the change. And that's also what creates the healing for everyone involved. So I really want to support that kind of a process in our community. Thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Amazing. Wonderful input via the community, and for each of you that had an opportunity to voice and to share what's on your hearts and your minds. And Ms. Lori, as you answer that question, the final question of the night, I believe it's an amazing time to begin to wrap it up in an effort to preserve this up moment. That being said, I thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to host tonight's gathering. I am excited about the future of Marin County and what this conversation will yield. Look forward to many more very productive conversations in the immediate future. That being said, District Attorney Fragoli, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. I did want to thank Morgan, who had to leave for another obligation, and I'm sorry she didn't get an opportunity to say goodnight. I would like at least 1 minute for each of our patient people who are on our panel to just have like 1 minute to follow up and share their thoughts. I don't just want to shut it down without them having a say, and I'm happy to cede my time to them. And I'm so honored and appreciative that everybody stuck it out here tonight for this great conversation. So Noah, you haven't got to say anything tonight, Noah Griffin, except for one statement. What would you like? Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for being so open to sharing and explaining to the members of the folks on this call and also the panel what the obligations of being in law enforcement is, what the obligations are with respect to charging, and the fact that This case has not been dismissed. It is on pause until such time as other evidence comes in. One of the ideas that I thought that came out of this, I think I heard, if I heard correctly from some of the other panelists, that if you display a swastika and it is there to intimidate or bring about violence, that can be pursued. I'd like the same legislation with respect to the hanging of a noose or the burning of a cross. I think those are equally reprehensible and need to be encoded in the law so that we can go after those individuals as well. I remember speaking to a woman in Nevada who said that there was a cross burned on her lawn. And I know that when one of the first Black families moved into Mill Valley, this was completely out of this case, but they went to spend a weekend in San Francisco. They came back and their house was burned. So I would love to see that as a positive act taken forward. But thank you for the opportunity to be here and to be a part of such a distinguished panel.
Thank you, Noah. Seth, did you have anything you wanted to say in closing? And thank you for your patience and sharing your knowledge once again with us tonight.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I thank everybody for attending and for being a part of this wonderful panel. You know, I would just say that confronting bias and fighting hate requires a lot of hands and a lot of different levels and a lot of different ways. So, you know, whatever it is that you find, however you can find your passion to get involved in this fight, please do it. There are a lot of great organizations out there that are doing this work. You know, there are a couple of them represented here tonight, Not in Our Town, ADL, the Holocaust Center, some, you know, restorative justice organizations and the like. Whatever it is where you can find your ability to contribute to this effort, please do. Last thing I wanted to say is I posted in the chat a new plan that ADL is launching on adl.org called the Protect Plan, which is a comprehensive way of meeting the challenge of rising domestic terrorism. So if you want to learn more, again, visit adl.org and please, you know, when you encounter hate, speak up.
Perfect. Thank you. Who did I miss? I can't see. I've lost my screen for a moment. If anybody has not said a final last thought, could you just speak up?
Sure. It's Patrice. I can't turn on my video, but I'd love to say a few words just to thank everyone for the incredible ideas and Lori for your leadership in opening up this discussion. It seems like there is this opportunity to do much more of this and to engage in the solutions-oriented discussions that have come out of this. I just want to invite people to come to NIAC Novato alerted us that they're starting a speaker series called A More Just Novato for Racial Equity. That's coming up in February. And that's a really sort of already planned way to continue this conversation, as well as sort of looking at their model for a hate and bias response team. So a lot to follow up on, some great ideas, and I think so much positive spirit from this discussion and many resources, as Seth said in his comments. So thank you so much, Lori, for inviting us to participate.
Tavia, are you ready? You started off with so much passion, and do you
Yes.
want to close this down? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Lori. First, thank you for giving us the opportunity to share our thoughts and letting the Jewish and the Black community have a sense to share how we are affected by what's happening in our county, and also to be open to having a difficult conversation. I know it's not easy to be in your seat. I've actually been in your seat in a different capacity, and you did it with grace and decorum and was respectful to everyone's voice. And I think we all appreciate you for doing that. So I would ask everyone on the panel and in the audience to going forward, we can't do it alone. Lori can't do it alone. And that every time we see something, we have to say something and take action in our individual lives as well as a community as a whole. So thank you again.
Thank you. That's beautiful. And we are going to work together and we can make a difference. Nobody can convince us otherwise. And one person does make a difference. And last, Craig Ferry, you started it off. You ready to really shut us down now?
I wouldn't use those words. So
I know.
thanks again for having me on. The FBI and Department of Justice appreciate the investigative and legal complexities that go along with these cases. It is no mystery to us, but we are absolutely committed to working with your staff in Marin County and all of local law enforcement throughout the Bay Area to include Marin County, also community outreach to the various communities, and also faith-based outreach with one of the primary goals of increasing reporting of hate incidents and hate crimes, as that gives us the opportunity or preserves the opportunity to further evaluate, federally adopt hateful activities that are in violation of federal law and satisfy those elements. So thank you for having me. If there's anything else I can do for you or anyone else on this call, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. And we jumped through a lot to get here, but it was so well worth it. We went over time. I appreciate everybody's patience. We still have a lot of people still online. So thank you again, and we will do this again, and we are going to move forward together and combat this. So think about all the different opportunities that were brought forth today by our panel members, and let's all show up and make some positive change. Have a great night. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you so much. And we do have your questions, the ones that weren't answered, we will get back to you. And thank you again, everyone, and Dion, especially for putting this together. And Jason, our IT specialist at the county, thank you so much for giving us the Zoom platform and the bandwidth to do this and carry it on. So, and for those who weren't able to get through, we apologize, but just tells us we have more to talk about. So thank you and stay safe, everyone.